Imagine stepping into a fortress of steel and concrete, a world built to cage society's most dangerous criminals. Guards stand vigilant, armed with authority and an unwavering pledge to maintain order. But what if the greatest threat in this cage isn't an inmate at all, but rather the very officer entrusted to uphold the law? That's exactly what happened behind the looming walls of Clayburn Correctional Facility. In a single, shocking twist, the line between protector and predator vanished, thrusting us into a tale of hidden passion, desperate cover-ups, and an unthinkable crime that echoed through every cell block. This story isn't just another headline or a cautionary tale. It's a chilling reminder that secrets born in the dark can spiral into nightmares beyond imagination. Before the final truth came to light, rumors whispered through locked cells, and an entire institution quaked under the weight of one man's forbidden double life. Every locked door, every guarded corridor seemed to conspire in silence, until at last, the secret erupted in a flash of violence. By the time the dust settled, one man lay dead, another's life was in ruins, and Clayburn's meticulously maintained facade of control lay shattered. Welcome to the hidden reality of prison life, where an officer's ironclad image was nothing more than a brittle mask, one that cracked beneath the pressures of guilt and obsession. Prepare yourself for a journey into the heart of betrayal, where power is wielded like a weapon, and the darkest confessions seep through prison bars to claim their final, inevitable reckoning. Welcome to True Crime Acts, where we look into the hidden truths behind some of the most chilling real-life events. Our mission is to uncover the stories that shock, educate, and spark change, reminding us that behind every headline is a victim, a family, and a ripple effect felt by an entire community. If you find this journey as important as we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to ensure you never miss another gripping exploration into the depths of human behavior. When order meets chaos in a place that thrives on power, the stage is set for tension unlike any other. At Clayburn Correctional Facility, two polar opposites collide: a duty-bound guard with a spotless record and an inmate whose unapologetic attitude defies every rule. They appear to stand on opposite sides of morality, until their lives become dangerously intertwined. Desmond carries the weight of immense respect on his shoulders. He's the officer who always arrives 10 minutes early, uniform impeccably pressed, demeanor measured, and voice steady. A former military man, he effortlessly commands attention among both inmates and fellow officers, radiating a strict moral code that borders on unyielding. At home, he's a pillar of the community, a faithful husband, a father of two, a deacon at his church. People admire him for his discipline, devotion, and unwavering sense of duty. Beneath the badge lies a man haunted by inner conflict. What he's hidden for years threatens everything he stands for. Each time he lectures inmates about responsibility and self-control, he's forced to stifle a secret he can't admit, not even to himself. Where Desmond is the picture of regimented order, Rico is a show of brash individuality. He walks through Clayburn with a casual air that seems completely at odds with his surroundings. Other inmates either resent him or cling to him. He has a way of getting under everyone's skin, often on purpose. Even before landing in prison, Rico was known for his boldness and flair. Money, parties, and influence came easily, and his confidence never dulled, even after being locked away. He's one of the few who's openly gay behind bars, a stance that could invite danger or discrimination. Yet he remains unashamed, almost daring anyone to challenge him. It's that brazen defiance that draws Desmond's eye, pushing the officer's control and patience to their breaking point. From the moment they cross paths, Clayburn's usual hierarchy begins to quake. Behind every handshake, every cell inspection, and every passing glance, a perilous attraction and a growing tension threaten to upend their worlds. Where Desmond's iron discipline clashes with Rico's free spirit, sparks fly, and in a prison built on strict rules, those sparks can rapidly grow into a wildfire no one can contain. Clayburn Correctional Facility stands grim and imposing, with razor wire coiling atop concrete walls like sentinels warning of hidden perils. Guard towers punctuate the perimeter, their beams sweeping across manicured grounds and harsh cell blocks, while uniformed officers move in rigid patterns honed by methodical routines. The echo of metal doors resonates through silent corridors, mingling with the hum of lights that never fully banish the shadows. Each day begins with the clang of the morning buzzer, a signal for inmates to line up, be counted, and follow a strict schedule that rarely deviates from dawn until lights out. Though structured, this routine crackles with quiet tension, as some prisoners adapt to survive the monotony, while others push against it, creating a precarious balance between enforced order and smoldering rebellion. Officers here shoulder immense responsibility. but their badges and uniforms do not shield them from personal challenges. Trust is a gamble in an environment where friendly gestures can be misconstrued or exploited, and a single misstep may unleash turmoil. While their primary duty is to maintain discipline, many wrestle with private dilemmas, striving to uphold professional standards even as they confront the unpredictability of human nature. A fleeting nod or a half-whispered promise in these corridors can tip the power balance, forging alliances that vanish as swiftly as they form. In this closed community, rumors move with the speed of light. A muffled exchange in the recreation yard can mutate into a sprawling story, part truth, part fabrication, by the time it crosses into another cell block. Sometimes these whispers deal in speculation about contraband, prompting frantic searches and tense interrogations. Other times they spiral around personal sagas, who's seeking revenge, who traded what favor, or which guard seems too familiar with which inmate. These fragments of hearsay fuel a relentless cycle of suspicion and intrigue. Beneath the institution's unyielding schedule and constant observation, every person, whether guard or inmate, faces their own private struggle. Inmates cope with the monotony of confinement, the weight of regret, and the survivalist mindset required by prison life. Guards, meanwhile, stand firm against unspoken pressures, aware that a momentary lapse could mean chaos. The longer one remains in this pressurized environment, the clearer it becomes that Clayburn isn't merely walls and wire. It's a crucible testing the boundaries of self-control, integrity, and resilience. So tell us, what do you think happens when the weight of secrets and suspicion finally becomes too much to bear, and can anyone truly remain unscathed in the fallout? Desmond Tate's reputation for self-restraint was almost legendary. An ex-military man whose brisk commands rarely wavered, he treated every inmate with cold neutrality, making it clear that personal feelings had no place on the job. Yet from the moment Rico Valentine arrived at Clayburn Correctional Facility, something within Desmond began to stir. This newcomer carried himself with an air of defiance that refused to bend, swaggering past officers as if their commands were merely suggestions. It was a confidence that both irritated and intrigued Desmond, sparking an inner struggle he had never before encountered. At first, Desmond responded by tightening his grip on the rules. He scheduled extra cell checks for Rico, issued warnings over minor infractions, and made a show of enforcing each regulation to the letter. To the casual observer, these acts seemed like a guard's standard attempts to assert control. Behind the scenes, however, Desmond wrestled with feelings he could neither explain nor dismiss. Rico's self-assured gaze lingered in his mind long after he ended his shift, disrupting the calm he had prided himself on for years. In each terse encounter, Desmond sensed an undercurrent of understanding passing between them, one that should never have existed in the unyielding environment of a prison. Eventually, the boundary snapped in a moment that would haunt them both. A routine evening check extended a second too long, and the tension between them flared into something physical. In the half-lit corridor, burdened by the knowledge that anyone could stumble upon them, desire eclipsed duty. A brief, stolen moment of contact, more raw than gentle, turned into a secret they had to guard at all costs. What began as antagonism slid into an unspoken connection, cloaked by the clang of cell doors and the relentless hum of overhead lights. Neither man could fully articulate what was happening, but they knew it was forbidden and dangerously addictive. As rumors started circulating that Officer Tate paid a little too much attention to Rico's cell, both men felt the pressure mount. Guilt gnawed at Desmond, who clung to his composure in front of fellow officers, while Rico wrestled with his own impulses in a place where vulnerability could be a death sentence. Together, they were teetering on a knife's edge, aware that a single misstep could spark catastrophe. So here's the question. How far would you go to satisfy a desire that could destroy everything you've built? And is it ever worth the risk? What began as stolen glances and discreet interactions soon became the focus of hushed conversations throughout Clayburn Correctional Facility. A subtle look here, a pause too long there, little details that would have slipped by unnoticed under normal circumstances now attracted pointed scrutiny. Inmates whispered among themselves, speculating about Desmond Tate's unusually intense interest in Rico Valentine. Fellow officers noticed too, a few questioning stares in the break room, an offhand remark about Desmond patrolling the same corridors night after night. Although no one had concrete proof, rumors have a life of their own, in a place where everyone thirsts for any snippet of information that hints at drama or scandal. In this claustrophobic atmosphere, every interaction magnified Desmond's growing paranoia. He found himself jumping at shadows, expecting a warden or a colleague to approach him at any moment with accusations he was unprepared to answer. Simple tasks, like performing a routine cell check, suddenly took on grave significance, as if the truth might reveal itself in the space between commands and compliance. The more Desmond fought to maintain his usual composure, the more he sensed that eyes were upon him, studying each move he made. It felt as though the entire institution was a powder keg, waiting for the slightest spark to ignite a blaze of speculation. Meanwhile, Rico navigated his own precarious path. Long used to living on the edge, he recognized the weight of what they were risking. Hints of tension, an unreturned nod, a curt dismissal, made him wonder if Desmond was on the verge of cracking. Yet pride and defiance kept Rico from backing down. This dance of secrecy between them, fueled by mutual desire and tempered by the fear of exposure, couldn't last forever in a rigid environment designed to sniff out any breach of control. The real question is, can two people hope to shield such a dangerous secret in a place where every whisper echoes, or will the very walls they inhabit ultimately betray them? Desmond Tate had always relied on his iron will to carry him through life's trials. He'd served in the military, managed the pressure of a high-stakes prison environment, and kept an unblemished reputation at home. But nothing could prepare him for the night he woke drenched in sweat, feverish and feeling weaker than he ever had before. At first, he dismissed it as stress or perhaps a passing bug, an unfortunate side effect of the long hours and constant vigilance required at Clayburn Correctional Facility. Yet the fatigue grew more persistent. His head pounded with unexplained aches, and no amount of rest seemed to restore him to his usual self. Reluctantly, Desmond sought medical attention. He arrived at the prison's health unit, body tense with apprehension as the overhead lights flickered. A nurse drew a vial of his blood with practiced efficiency, then sent him on his way with the promise of a follow-up. In the days that followed, he fought to maintain his composure, patrolling the corridors and issuing commands, while a nagging dread coiled inside him. When the results finally arrived, he felt his heart pound at the mere sight of the envelope. With trembling hands, he opened the document that confirmed his worst fear, HIV positive. In an instant, the foundation of his life cracked. Panic consumed him, mingling with shock and denial. He replayed every recent encounter in his mind, searching for a place to direct his anger and shame. Inevitably, all his thoughts turned to Rico Valentine, the man he believed was responsible for shattering the image of control and respect Desmond had so diligently built. Where once he had wrestled with the guilt of their affair, now a furious blame began to take root. It felt as though the ground beneath him had opened up, threatening to swallow all he cherished. His marriage, his standing in the community, and his pristine reputation among colleagues. Though fear and sickness weighed on him, Desmond knew one thing for certain. If the truth behind this diagnosis ever came to light, everything he stood for would be destroyed in a heartbeat. In his mind, there was no other explanation. Rico was the source, and now a ticking clock counted down the days until the entire scandal exposed him. Questions about how or why barely registered, drowned out by a singular obsession, maintaining his secret at all costs. So what happens when an officer, sworn to uphold law and order, feels his only salvation lies in a desperate act he never could have imagined committing? A cold dread took hold of Desmond Tate the moment he read the stark letters on his test results. Yet beneath that fear, a darker emotion simmered. His entire life, he had prided himself on discipline. He believed it kept him safe, kept him righteous. Now he saw only one threat standing between him and the catastrophic collapse of his carefully curated existence: Rico Valentine. Every day Desmond spent behind Clayburn's walls reminded him of the ticking clock, his mind spiraling through worst-case scenarios as he imagined Rico exposing their relationship or somehow confirming his suspicions. Each thought drove the sense of betrayal and fury deeper into Desmond's heart, curdling into an almost palpable anger. At first, he tried to cling to reason. He weighed his options, scrutinizing every angle in search of a way out that didn't involve crossing the ultimate line. But the more he considered what he stood to lose, his family, his reputation, his future, the less rational he became. Late at night, after another feverish day of patrolling the corridors, Desmond paced the dimly lit rooms of his own home, battling a tide of obsessive thoughts. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat. Every distant sound made him jump, as if the revelation of his secret had already reached his doorstep. Within the prison, his interactions with Rico evolved into an intense, silent standoff. Any fleeting glance from the inmate felt like a challenge, a reminder of Desmond's vulnerability. Though no direct words were exchanged, an undercurrent of tension rippled between them, crackling like static electricity. Inmates and guards alike picked up on the hostility, even if they didn't fully grasp its source. Desmond's paranoia escalated with each passing moment. He saw accusations in every smirk, every hushed conversation that halted when he walked by. That pervasive anxiety set the stage for his darkest thoughts to morph into a plan. Rico must not be allowed to speak, he told himself in the depths of another sleepless night. It was a grim refrain, echoing louder each time he felt a fresh twinge of sickness or caught a knowing look from another officer. Under the glow of a single lamp, Desmond began to map out a scenario where Rico's death could be explained away as just another incident of prison violence. A regrettable scuffle, the kind that happens in high-security environments when tempers flare. He told himself this was the only way to preserve the life he'd built, no matter how twisted the reasoning became. And so the question looms. When a man trades conscience for desperation, how long before the line between duty and destruction vanishes entirely? The clock struck 10:15 p.m. at Clayburn Correctional Facility, and the corridors fell into a hushed routine. Most inmates settled in their cells, drifting to sleep or filling the silence with whispered conversations. For Desmond Tate, however, this was not just another evening shift. The rhythmic hum of fluorescent lights overhead did little to calm the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. Each step he took down the cold concrete hallways felt heavier than the last, burdened by the deed he was about to commit. His plan, painstakingly rehearsed in the privacy of countless sleepless nights, hinged on precision and secrecy. He had memorized the guard rotations, chosen a moment when the cameras would least likely be scrutinized, and waited for the instant Rico Valentine would be alone. Despite the rage burning inside him, he forced his face into a mask of composure, performing the standard checks just as he always did. Inmates took little notice of Desmond's stoic demeanor. They were used to it, and that familiarity was exactly what he needed to blend into the routine. When Desmond finally stood outside Rico's cell, a current of dread and determination churned in his chest. Rico glanced up, his expression inscrutable in the dimly lit space. Perhaps he sensed something off in the air, a tension darker than any they had shared before. The moment stretched taut with suspense, as though both men knew their next actions could define not just that night, but the rest of their lives. In one heart-stopping instant, Desmond stepped forward, crossing an invisible line he'd once sworn he'd never breach. What happened next was swift, brutal, and final. Furious words hissed under hushed breath gave way to physical confrontation, every sound heightened by the claustrophobic stillness of the prison halls. Concrete walls that normally swallowed echoes seemed to amplify each ragged breath and muffled blow. Desmond's anger, stoked by betrayal, fear, and desperation, exploded in violence he could barely control. Rico fought back with the ferocity of someone who refused to be another statistic. But the ambush had been carefully chosen. There was nowhere to run, no one to call for help in that dead corner of the facility. In the aftermath, the scene was both surreal and haunting. Heavy breathing and the tang of sweat filled the stale air. Desmond's heart pounded like a drum, while Rico lay still in a final, grim silence. The guard who had once taken pride in his commitment to the rules now stood over the very proof of his undoing, a life ended by his own hands. In that moment, time felt suspended, as if the weight of what he had done pinned him to the ground alongside his victim. Though the plan had been executed, the night was far from over. Desmond needed to stage the scene, to plant the seeds of a believable story for any investigators who came calling. Through a haze of adrenaline, he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the shadows of fellow officers or the warden descending upon him. With trembling hands, he began the cover-up, wresting control of a narrative he desperately hoped would hide his darkest secret. But secrets, especially those carved from blood and betrayal, have a way of unraveling. As Desmond attempted to clean up the evidence of his crime, one question refused to leave his mind. Had this act truly buried the truth, or merely lit a fuse that would blow his entire world apart? When Desmond Tate finally stepped away from Rico Valentine's lifeless form, adrenaline still coursed through his veins. Every breath was shallow, every passing second felt like a countdown. He glanced at the smeared traces of violence around him and forced himself to move methodically, recalling the elaborate story he'd concocted to justify what had just happened. If he could make it look like a violent altercation, one of the many that plagued any high-security prison, perhaps no one would suspect the tangled personal motives that had truly driven him to kill. He began by doing what any seemingly dutiful officer would do, radioing for assistance. His voice, usually calm and authoritative, sounded strained and clipped as he reported a fight in Rico's cell. He mustered every ounce of composure to rattle off the location and request a medical team. Next, he set about arranging the scene, just enough to hint at a sudden struggle. Objects were knocked askew, a few items scattered on the floor. Desmond took care not to overdo it. Too much disarray might appear staged. All the while, he kept glancing at the cell entrance, half convinced he'd see another guard watching from the hallway. When backup finally arrived, Desmond delivered a concise, grim explanation. "Valentine attacked me. I had no choice." He repeated the words by rote, focusing on every syllable, conscious that any show of hesitation or inconsistency could unravel his cover story. Officials from the prison's internal investigation unit arrived on the scene quickly, armed with digital cameras and notepads. They asked questions in calm, professional tones, their expressions carefully schooled, but their eyes revealed flickers of suspicion. A death within prison walls was never treated lightly, especially when it involved an inmate with a notorious reputation for stirring the pot. Despite the tension, Desmond held to the familiar role of the dedicated guard who had been forced to act under dire circumstances. His uniform, stained with evidence of the struggle, lent an air of authenticity to his claim, and the frantic energy in his voice felt genuine. Because in a way, it was. Deep inside, terror and guilt battled for dominance. Though he presented a version of events he hoped would satisfy the investigators, a piece of him wondered if they noticed how his eyes darted away whenever they probed too closely. Word spread through Clayburn like lightning. Inmates whispered variations on the story, some putting forth wild theories of secret feuds or hidden debts. A few who had already suspected Desmond's personal interest in Rico exchanged meaningful glances. Officers murmured among themselves in the break room, debating whether to believe Desmond's statement or question the subtleties of his demeanor. The warden in particular harbored doubts. Well aware of Desmond's sterling record, he struggled to accept that a prisoner could have so expertly provoked such a seasoned officer into committing lethal force. While investigators collected forensics and conducted interviews, Desmond did his best to maintain a rigid front of normalcy, speaking only when spoken to and limiting his answers to official protocols. Yet a quiet dread gnawed at him, warning that the slightest misstep could expose the one thing he feared above all else, the motive that transcended self-defense. He knew that every piece of evidence, every photograph, every testimonial had the potential to poke holes in his narrative. And so the final question lingers. Can a carefully staged lie truly stand when the unseen bond between an officer and an inmate carries far more weight than any contrived scene of a prison brawl? Investigators eventually pieced together enough evidence, ranging from suspicious timing and forensic inconsistencies to inmates' sworn statements, to cast serious doubt on Desmond Tate's self-defense claim. While he initially maintained that Rico Valentine attacked him, too many details failed to line up. The prison's internal review discovered inconsistencies in Desmond's written reports, camera records that contradicted parts of his timeline, and compelling testimony from multiple inmates who sensed Desmond's fixation on Rico long before the fatal incident. As the case proceeded to trial, the prosecution argued that Desmond had orchestrated the confrontation due to personal motives, effectively premeditating Rico's death. Defense attorneys tried to paint Rico as a dangerous inmate who provoked the encounter. However, conflicting stories and the pattern of Desmond's behavior at Clayburn undercut that narrative. Ultimately, a jury found Desmond guilty of second-degree murder, rejecting the notion that he had acted out of necessity. The judge handed down a substantial prison sentence, sealing Desmond's fate within a system he once controlled, and ensuring that the final chapters of his life would be spent behind bars, alongside the very inmates he'd sworn to keep in line. As the echo of unanswered questions resounded through Clayburn Correctional Facility, the aftermath of Rico Valentine's death left a residue of unease that no one could ignore. Inmates eyed the guards with new wariness, sharing hushed theories behind barred windows and locked doors. Guards, once secure in their routines, felt the weight of an unspoken tension they couldn't precisely name. Despite the official statements and procedural reports, rumors of Desmond Tate's motives and secret entanglements persisted in every corner of the prison. Beyond Clayburn's fortified walls, the wider world soon caught wind of the tragedy. Headlines cast doubt on the guard who had been lauded for unwavering integrity. Friends and family who thought they knew Desmond well struggled to reconcile the man they admired with the dark implications now tied to his name. Meanwhile, those closest to Rico mourned in their own ways, questioning how a confident spirit could end in such brutal fashion. Every revelation, every scrap of rumor or trace of evidence, kept nudging the spotlight toward the one revelation Desmond feared most, that the line between the enforcer and the condemned was far thinner than anyone dared to believe. In the wake of the tragedy, those who probed deeper found themselves wrestling with more universal questions. What happens when someone charged with protecting order becomes the ultimate violator of that order? Can a lifetime of discipline and respect truly vanish in an instant of unbridled fury? And how does one measure the moral cost of silencing a person forever to maintain a carefully guarded facade? Clayburn's unspoken code of conduct had been shredded, revealing the stark truth that within any set of prison walls, power dynamics run in complex loops. No guard is immune to temptation. No inmate is without influence. Ultimately, Desmond's story serves as a grim reminder that one's public image can be shattered by a single, desperate act. No matter how thick the barriers, how watchful the towers, or how rigid the rules, secrets may be as deadly as any hidden weapon. In a place built to constrain the worst impulses of those who break society's laws, the dire consequences of forbidden desire and betrayal prove that sometimes the most devastating threat comes not from beyond the bars, but from the very heart of those sworn to guard them. How do you think this final twist affects our faith in law and order? And what lingering shadows do such betrayals cast on the very institutions meant to protect us? Desmond Tate sat in the back of the transport van, wrists bound by cold, unyielding metal. Outside, the steel gates of Clayburn Correctional Facility loomed in the fading light. A place he once controlled with authority, now the place he would call home for a crime born of fear and obsession. He gazed through the tiny window at the watchtowers he used to walk beneath, recalling the days he believed his uniform stood for honor and integrity. As the gates groaned open, reality settled around him like a heavy cloak. He was returning to a prison he had helped manage, but this time as an inmate. Memories of the trial churned in his mind, evidence laid bare, hushed testimonies, and the final reading of the verdict that sealed his fate. Over and over he replayed that pivotal moment, that split second when he crossed the line from enforcer to perpetrator. The hum of the van's engine filled the silence, offering no comfort, only the unrelenting truth of what he'd done. In that moment, he thought of the countless warnings he'd ignored, the guilt he tried to suppress, and the secrets he assumed he could keep hidden. He had governed his life by strict rules, yet a single forbidden impulse had shattered it all. Now it's your turn to weigh in. Was Desmond's betrayal inevitable, or could he have chosen a different path before it was too late? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click that notification bell to stay updated on more gripping true crime stories. Because in a world where secrets can turn even the most trusted officer into a criminal, every cautionary tale deserves to be heard.